Before we jump into this crazy story, drop a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Maybe you're relaxing in a sunny Florida suburb, stuck in traffic in downtown Los Angeles, or enjoying the calm of a mountain town in Colorado. I love seeing just how far these Karen stories of chaos and karma manage to reach. Blue and red lights flashed across the front of my house, throwing strange colors onto the beige siding and brick trim. Two officers stood at the curb, one of them clamping handcuffs around the wrists of a teenager in a light blue t-shirt and khaki shorts. His head hung low, but I could still see the flush of embarrassment on his cheeks. His mother stood beside him, clutching a cardboard package against her chest like it was a newborn she had to protect, her shrill voice echoing across the entire street. Neighbors lingered on their lawns, whispering, watching, savoring the spectacle that was Barbara finally losing control. I was standing on my porch, one hand gripping the railing, the other holding the delivery slip that proved the package was mine. In that moment, everything I'd put up with from her, every insult, every smug grin, had boiled over into this. You want to know how it got this far? It started with a single box. A week earlier, it had been a normal morning. The kind of morning where the neighborhood still smelled faintly of wet grass and sprinkler mist. The kind of quiet that made you think the world might actually be peaceful if left alone. I was sipping coffee on my porch, enjoying the ritual I'd grown to depend on. 35 years old, a modest life, a steady job, none of it glamorous, but I liked the comfort of small routines. And few things brought me more joy than getting a delivery. It wasn't about materialism, not really. It was the anticipation, the click of a mouse, the wait, and then the arrival of something you'd earned for yourself. It gave shape to my days. But in my neighborhood, peace was fragile. Because we had Barbara. Barbara was the kind of neighbor you prayed you'd never get, and yet she lived directly across the street. She was about 40, heavy-set, with cropped blonde hair that somehow managed to look both neglected and aggressively styled. She walked with a sense of command that had no basis in reality. If the HOA board was a kingdom, Barbara was the self-appointed queen. She patrolled our street like it was her private empire, barking about trash bins being left out too long, about lawns cut half an inch too high, about children riding their bikes too close to her driveway. She wore her authority like armor, even though everyone knew she bullied the board into silence. And then there was her son, a teenager, maybe 16 or 17, with the same smirk permanently glued to his face. He parroted her entitlement, swaggering through the neighborhood like he'd inherited it. I'd seen him kick over garden gnomes, cut across people's lawns, and laugh at anyone who protested. Always, Barbara defended him. Always, she claimed the neighborhood rules allowed it. Together, they were a plague no one wanted to fight. The day everything shifted, I had been waiting for a special delivery. Something I'd saved for, a new tablet, top of the line, a reward to myself after months of overwork. I tracked the package obsessively, refreshing the shipping updates on my phone until the notification finally pinged. Delivered. Porch. I opened my door, stepped outside, and froze. My porch was empty. The concrete still held the faint rectangular outline of where a box had sat, but it was gone. No truck in sight, no neighbor walking by, nothing. My stomach tightened. I pulled up the live feed from my security camera, fast-forwarding through the clip. And there he was, Barbara's son, strolling up the walkway like he owned the place. No hesitation. He bent down, scooped up the box, glanced at the camera with that smug smile, and sauntered back across the street. My jaw clenched so hard I thought I'd crack a molar. He hadn't even bothered to hide it. I walked straight across to Barbara's house, the recording still on my phone screen. She opened the door after the second knock, her red blouse stretched tight across her shoulders, her mouth already curling into irritation. "What do you want?" she demanded. "Your son just stole my package," I said, holding up the phone. The clip played, clear as day. I want it back. Her eyes flicked to the screen, then back to me, as if she'd already prepared an answer. "That's not stealing. He said it was ours." "A wrong delivery." "No," I said. "It was addressed to me. Delivered to my house. That box belongs to me." She crossed her arms. If it was left out in the open, then it wasn't secure. Our HOA rules state that unclaimed deliveries can be considered community property. My chest burned. That's not a rule. You made that up. Call it what you want, she said with a smug shrug. But my son told me it was ours. He wouldn't lie. Her son appeared behind her in the hallway, the box in his hands, tearing at the tape like Christmas morning. He looked straight at me, grinned, and said, "Mom said it's ours." My fists curled, but I kept my voice steady. "Barbara, you've crossed the line." She leaned forward, eyes glittering with arrogance. "No, you're the one crossing the line. Now leave before I report you for harassment." The door slammed in my face, leaving me staring at my own reflection in the glass. I walked back across the street, blood roaring in my ears. My tablet was gone. Months of saving just ripped from me with a single smug grin and a mother's permission slip of entitlement. I wanted to storm back over, to rip the box from his hands, but what good would it do? Barbara thrived on confrontation. She'd twist it, call the police on me, paint herself as the victim. That night, I sat at my kitchen table replaying the footage, over and over, each time feeling the anger deepen. Every few seconds, I'd hear his voice echo in my head. "Mom said it's ours." As if that made theft acceptable. As if her authority could rewrite reality. The next morning, I tried reason. I emailed the HOA, attached the video, explained the theft. Their reply came back hours later, sterile and unhelpful. The HOA does not involve itself in private disputes between residents. In other words, Barbara had them wrapped around her finger. Later that afternoon, I walked by her yard just to see if maybe she'd relented. Maybe she'd come to her senses. Instead, I found her on the porch, laughing with a neighbor. When she spotted me, she cupped her hands around her mouth and shouted, "Hey, package boy, lose anything lately?" Her son doubled over in laughter beside her. The humiliation was like acid. I thought about ignoring it, but then another package vanished the very next day. Smaller, less expensive, but still mine. Again, the security footage told the same story. Her son, casual, entitled, scooping it up under her watchful eye. She didn't even try to hide anymore. To Barbara, theft had become neighborhood policy. By the third package, I knew this wasn't just about me. Quietly, neighbors began to mention similar stories. A missing box of shoes here, a vanished Amazon order there. None of them had proof. None of them wanted to confront her. Barbara's intimidation had built a wall around her, and everyone else cowered behind it. But not me. I couldn't sleep that night. My living room was dark, lit only by the glow of the replaying video. Her son's grin burned into my retinas. Barbara's smug dismissal repeated in my ears. I realized something then. Barbara didn't fear confrontation. She thrived on it. She fed off it like oxygen. But what she couldn't handle was exposure. She couldn't handle undeniable proof, especially proof that stripped away her lies in front of an audience she couldn't control. That thought settled deep into my chest. I didn't need to argue with her. I needed to show everyone what she really was. The plan began to take shape before dawn. I'd set the trap. I'd make sure the next package wasn't hers to keep, no matter how many rules she invented. And when her son touched it, when Barbara defended him again, the truth would finally crash down around them both. As I sat in that dim living room, the first threads of sunlight creeping through the blinds, I felt my anger transform into something sharper. Not rage, not despair, strategy. I knew exactly what I had to do, and I knew Barbara would never see it coming. I tried the polite route first, though deep down I already knew it was useless. The morning after my sleepless revelation, I crossed the street and knocked on Barbara's door one last time. She opened it with that same air of irritation, as though I were a stray salesman interrupting her empire. I held up printed proof of my order, my voice steady, controlled. "Barbara," I said, "the package was mine. Delivered to my address. I have the video. I have everything. All I want is my property returned. We can settle this right now." Her son leaned against the hallway wall behind her, arms folded, grinning. Barbara barely looked at the paper before flicking her hand dismissively. "If you leave things outside, they're not safe," she said. "You should know better." My son told me it was ours, and I trust him more than I trust you. You should stop harassing us before this gets serious. I clenched my jaw. It already is serious. That's theft. She tilted her head, eyes narrowing. You're becoming obsessed with a box. Do you hear yourself? Packages come and go. Let it go. Behind her, her son muttered just loud enough for me to hear. Package boy. Barbara smirked. See? Even the neighborhood knows you by that name now. I turned without another word. Rage wouldn't fix this. It never had with her. She thrived on it. The HOA was my next step. I sent the emails, the footage, the receipts. Their response was little more than a shrug cloaked in corporate language. They didn't want to get involved. They called it a personal dispute between neighbors. I could picture Barbara leaning back in a boardroom chair, whispering her poison into their ears, ensuring her power remained untouched. But Barbara had underestimated one thing. I had patience. She thought humiliation would drive me into silence, but it only sharpened my resolve. Days passed, and more packages vanished. A set of headphones, a book, even a box of coffee pods. Each time, the camera caught the same routine. Her son strolling across my lawn, stooping down, lifting the box with lazy confidence. Sometimes he glanced up, smirked, and tossed a mocking salute to the lens. Once, Barbara herself appeared in the background, arms folded, watching with approval. I wasn't the only victim. Mrs. Porter from 3 houses down complained about her missing shoes. A young couple whispered about a stroller that never arrived. No one had footage. No one wanted a confrontation. Barbara had bullied them into silence for years, and they'd learned it was easier to absorb the loss than invite her wrath. But I had proof, and I wasn't going to let it rot on my hard drive. The plan began with another order. This time, I purchased something cheap, something I didn't care about losing. But before it arrived, I spent hours preparing. I rigged a tracker inside the box, tiny, discreet, impossible to notice. And just beneath the outer layer of cardboard, I tucked a dye pack. A burst of bright, unmistakable color waiting to explode. When the package finally landed on my porch, I placed it squarely in the center, angled perfectly for the camera. Then I retreated inside. The blinds cracked just enough to give me a view. My heart pounded like I was preparing for battle. Minutes ticked by. Cars hummed distantly. A dog barked 2 streets over. Then movement. Barbara's front door opened. Her son stepped out, hands shoved in his pockets, swagger in every step. He crossed the street without hesitation, not even glancing around. To him, this was routine, his personal shopping trip. He bent down, scooped up the box, and grinned. The trap was his. He walked back toward his house, swinging it casually at his side. I could barely contain the adrenaline flooding through me. Then it happened. A sharp pop, followed by a cloud of vivid blue dye erupting from the seams. It splattered across his shirt, his arms, his face, even the pavement beneath his shoes. He yelped, dropping the box, flailing his arms in panic. Barbara burst out the front door at the sound. She froze, staring at her son dripping with dye, the box still hissing faint blue vapor on the ground. Her expression flickered from confusion to horror to fury in the span of a second. She rushed to him, grabbing his shoulders, her red blouse streaking with the same stain. From my window, I lifted my phone and dialed. My voice was steady, almost calm. Yes, officer. I'd like to report a theft in progress. I have video evidence. The suspect is covered in blue dye. Within minutes, sirens wailed down the street. Neighbors began to emerge, drawn by the commotion. First a few, then clusters. Barbara's son stood on the lawn, his clothes ruined, his skin streaked, sputtering excuses, while Barbara tried to wipe the evidence away with frantic hands. Her shrill voice carried, "It's ours." It was mis-delivered. He thought it was ours. The patrol car stopped in front of my house, lights flashing. 2 officers stepped out, hands resting casually on their belts. I walked out to meet them, calm, collected, holding my phone in one hand, the order slip in the other. "Officers," I said, "thank you for coming. That box was mine, delivered to my address. Here's the footage of him taking it. Here's the receipt. Barbara stormed over, her arms outstretched, still clutching the stained package. This is harassment. My son did nothing wrong. He thought it belonged to us. The taller officer raised an eyebrow. Ma'am, the package was addressed to him. The video shows your son taking it from his porch. He's lying, she shouted, jabbing a finger at me. He's obsessed with us. He planted something in the box, just to frame us. The second officer folded his arms, unimpressed. Then why is your son covered in dye? Her son shifted uncomfortably, mumbling. Mom said it was ours. The crowd of neighbors gasped. Phones lifted. Cameras recorded. The spectacle Barbara had always avoided was now her prison. Every eye was on her. Every whisper was fuel for her downfall. I held my ground, silent, letting the evidence speak louder than words. Barbara sputtered, tried again, her voice cracking under the weight of her own lies. This isn't theft. It's community property. The officer shook his head. That's not how the law works. And then, finally, the moment arrived. The cuffs clicked around her son's wrists. The boy's bravado drained from his face, replaced by wide-eyed panic. Barbara screamed, lunging forward, but the other officer held her back with a firm arm. No, she shrieked. You can't do this. He's innocent. You can't. Her words dissolved into incoherent rage. The neighborhood stood frozen, absorbing the sight of Barbara undone. For the first time in years, her power was gone. Her shield of intimidation shattered by her own arrogance. The officer glanced at me, nodding slightly. We'll need you to provide that footage for evidence. Of course, I said, my voice steady, though inside I could feel the tremor of victory rising. Barbara's eyes locked onto mine across the lawn, filled with venom and disbelief. She had lived her life believing rules bent around her will, that neighbors would cower forever. But now, with her son in cuffs, her blouse stained blue, her neighbors filming her disgrace, she saw the truth. And I knew this was only the beginning. The officers guided her son toward the patrol car, neighbors whispering in ripples of excitement. Barbara shouted, clawed, begged, but nothing stopped the inevitable march of justice. I stood on my porch, hands relaxed at my sides, the weight of months of frustration finally beginning to lift. Yet, as the door of the cruiser shut and her son disappeared behind the glass, I knew the story wasn't finished. Barbara wouldn't surrender quietly. She would fight, rage, claw her way back into the illusion of control. But this time, she was fighting on broken ground. And I was ready. Barbara's voice was still echoing across the cul-de-sac as the patrol car pulled away with her son inside. The wail of the siren faded, leaving behind an almost eerie silence. Neighbors lingered on their lawns, phones lowered now, but their expressions still sharp with interest. They had witnessed something none of them thought possible. Barbara stripped of her authority. Yet even in defeat, she refused to back down. She stood in the middle of her yard, her blouse smeared with streaks of blue dye, her hair sticking to her forehead with sweat. Her eyes burned holes into me from across the street, hatred pulsing from every ragged breath she took. I could almost hear the gears in her mind grinding, trying desperately to twist this humiliation into some version of victory. You think this is over? She screamed suddenly, pointing at me with a trembling finger. You set us up. You won't get away with this. I'll have you thrown out of this neighborhood if it's the last thing I do. The crowd of neighbors stirred, whispers rolling like wind through dry leaves. For years, those words had been enough to silence them. Threats from Barbara carried weight because she always followed through. But now, with her son cuffed and taken away, her words sounded empty, desperate. The more she shouted, the more her power dissolved. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The sight of her unraveling in front of everyone was enough. Silence was my weapon, and it struck harder than any argument could. That night, the neighborhood group chat lit up. Messages poured in, screenshots of Barbara's meltdown, clips of her son being arrested, speculation about charges. For once, the tide had turned. People weren't afraid to speak anymore. Some even confessed to years of stolen deliveries, of intimidation, of being too scared to push back. One message stood out: thank you. You did what the rest of us couldn't. Still, the satisfaction didn't erase the tension inside me. Because Barbara wasn't finished. People like her never were. The next morning confirmed it. I woke to the sound of pounding, my door rattling under heavy fists. I opened it to find Barbara standing there, her face flushed, her blouse freshly washed but faintly stained at the edges, a faint reminder of yesterday's dye. Her voice cracked as she launched into another tirade. "You think you're clever, don't you?" she spat. "Humiliating me in front of everyone. Setting up my boy. He's a good kid. You ruined his life." I stood calmly in the doorway, coffee mug in hand. "Your son stole from me. Over and over. Actions have consequences." "He wouldn't have done it if you weren't dangling packages out in the open," she snapped. "You baited him. That's entrapment." "Entrapment," I repeated slowly, almost amused. "Barbara, it's called theft. And you encouraged it." Her nostrils flared. "You'll regret this. I'll take it to the board, to the HOA, to court if I have to. You won't win." I stepped closer, lower my voice so only she could hear. "Barbara, you already lost. Everyone saw it. Everyone knows. You can scream as much as you want, but you can't erase what happened." For the first time, I saw her hesitate. Her lips trembled, her eyes darting away for just a moment. Then, with a final huff, she spun on her heel and stormed back across the street. The battle lines were drawn. The following days unfolded like a storm. Barbara called emergency HOA meetings, demanded my expulsion, accused me of harassment. She claimed I planted the dye pack to harm her son. She circulated letters on every doorstep, framing herself as the victim of my obsession. But the evidence was too strong, the footage too undeniable. Neighbors who once cowered under her glare now rolled their eyes. Some even laughed openly when she passed. Her empire was crumbling. Meanwhile, the legal process began. Officers came back for follow-up statements. I handed over the videos, the receipts, the messages. Barbara's son faced charges of theft, and while he was a minor, the record would stain him for years. Barbara screamed at every hearing, clinging to her version of the truth. But no matter how loudly she spoke, the law spoke louder. What struck me most wasn't the collapse of her power, it was the silence that replaced it. For years, her voice had been the loudest, her presence the most suffocating. Now, when I stepped outside, the neighborhood felt different, lighter. Children rode their bikes freely again. Mrs. Porter waved without glancing nervously toward Barbara's yard. Even the air seemed easier to breathe. One evening, as I sat on my porch with a cup of tea, a few neighbors gathered near. They thanked me quietly, cautiously, as though still testing the safety of their newfound freedom. I told them the truth, that it wasn't bravery, it was necessity. Barbara had pushed me past a point of tolerance, and the only way forward was to fight back. But even in victory, I knew better than to relax completely. Barbara was quiet now, quieter than I'd ever known her to be. Her blinds stayed drawn. Her car rarely left the driveway. She avoided eye contact. Yet I could feel it, the bitterness brewing, the hatred hardening like stone. She wasn't done. The true climax came a week later. I heard shouting again, not from Barbara this time, but from her yard. Police cars lined the street once more. Neighbors spilled out of their homes to witness the latest scene. Barbara stood in her driveway, screaming at two officers, her son beside her, sullen and defiant. She had violated the conditions of his release, tried to cover up more stolen packages belonging to someone else this time. The officers had traced it easily. Now the consequences were heavier, unavoidable. Her son would face stricter charges, and Barbara herself was fined for obstruction. I watched from my porch, arms folded, as the officers guided them both toward the car. Her voice cracked into something desperate, pleading. Not the arrogant tone she once used, but the sound of someone who realized the walls had finally closed in. She locked eyes with me across the street, her face twisted in a mixture of rage and despair. For a moment, I almost pitied her. Almost. The patrol car pulled away again, and the neighborhood exhaled as one. A collective sense of relief, of justice, finally served. Later that night, I walked out onto my porch again, the air cool and quiet. The street was empty, calm under the glow of streetlights. I thought about everything that had happened, the stolen packages, the humiliation, the trap, the arrest. It felt surreal, like a battle I hadn't chosen, but had been forced into. I leaned against the railing, sipping my tea, and let a smile slip. Barbara had always believed she could twist reality to suit her, that her voice was stronger than truth itself. But in the end, it wasn't my trap that defeated her. It was her arrogance, her inability to see that rules applied to her too. The neighborhood would remember this moment. The silence after years of noise. The sight of Barbara's empire finally collapsing. And though I knew she might never forgive, might never stop scheming in the dark corners of her bitterness, it no longer mattered. Because she had been exposed. I glanced across the street one last time. Her house loomed dark, curtains pulled tight. For years, it had been the source of dread, the place everyone avoided. Now it looked smaller somehow. Just another house, stripped of its power. I whispered to myself, almost amused, "So next time, Barbara, when you say it's yours, make sure the cops agree." The night air carried the words away, and with it, the weight of everything that had happened. The story wasn't over, not really. People like Barbara never vanish completely. But for the first time in years, the neighborhood belonged to itself again. And that was enough.